We need a countdown. 1 minute to go.
All right, everybody. Well, it's 2:00. So by my watch. So wanted to get things started off. So I want to welcome everybody who's joining us today to Magnitude's LinkedIn Live Office Hours event. My name is Gary Corbett. I'm the Director of Business Development at Magnitude Consulting, and I'll be acting as today's moderator. We obviously appreciate you joining us, and we intend for this to be an interactive session designed for us to share marketing strategies and actionable solutions that are specifically tailored to the IT services industry. So thankfully we received a number of questions ahead of time, but we're also going to be fielding questions on the LinkedIn Live page. So comment and burning questions that you have, and we're going to do our best to fit in questions in the time allotted. If we aren't able to address any questions today, we're going to be addressing them at a later time and make sure it gets distributed to all of you. And then just as a reminder, following the live event, we're going to be sharing a recording of the webinar. So if you don't get every note down, it's not the end of the world. We'll make sure you get this copy. And we'll also give you an exclusive opportunity for a free marketing health check. So this offer basically gives you a live consultation that helps to uncover strengths within your marketing, areas of improvement, competitive metrics, idea generation, and a lot more included, but that's an overview for you. So to not waste any more time, I want to make sure we're getting the Q&A started, and I want to introduce our panel. The team at Magnitude, decades of experience delivering and executing marketing growth strategies in the IT services industry. And today we have two of our foremost experts in the field, our founder and CEO, Natalie Nathanson, and our VP of Strategy and Delivery, Cindy Hunter. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question now. I'll address this to you. How do I, if I'm working in a marketing role or in a company, how do I know whether my marketing is performing at the right level? How do I know if it's successful? What does success look like? What can we expect from marketing?
Yeah, I think it's a good, I would say, one that we get pretty often, and I think it is all relative, but it really starts with defining your objectives. I think, more often than not, it stems back to growth and lead generation, but being clear about what that needs to look like. Again, oftentimes looking at kind of net new business goals and kind of who is the kind of ideal client profile, and what is marketing's role in driving leads and engagement with those prospects. But then I would say, across the board, but specifically in IT services, there's often a lot of low-hanging fruit with client programming as well, and that's an area that sometimes is underperforming and a place to get a lot of quick value. So thinking about if you have project-based clients, how to leverage marketing to move them into managed services, how to re-engage past clients, and then really making sure that you're utilizing marketing to its fullest. So not only lead generation, but really leaning on marketing to look strategically at where are the opportunities in the market. That might be new service offerings, new market segments, certain industry verticals to prioritize, things like that. And then lastly, I would say is supporting visibility, the visibility of the company, and making sure marketing is helping to get the company's name out there. That could be through digital efforts, media opportunities, speaking engagements, and really make sure you're kind of harnessing the full power of your organization. So a bit of a long-winded answer, but I think it really does kind of dovetail into really all the areas you should be expecting marketing to perform. Cindy, add anything else to that?
Yeah, so I think where you can find benchmarking data. So because like you said, it's all relative of, what am I performing and how am I performing against my competitors, my peers. Those kinds of analysis is really worthwhile to take a step back and look at. Gary mentioned the health check, which is, not everybody has the tools to kind of look at competitive activity. But I think it's really valuable to keep your finger on that pulse. And then also, I think, when looking at performance and everything, think about how clean the data is that you're looking at, right? Because a lot of times we're making judgment calls based on the data. And if it's not clean or it's not accurate, then we're going to make faulty decisions. So I would say not only look at all of the ways that marketing can help kind of elevate you internally, but what's happening in the market outside you and how do you stack up. So it's a few thoughts there.
Awesome. I was getting ready to do my debate moderator. Have to cut you guys off. You guys right
Counterpoint.
Keeping things tight
under the
for
gun.
us. Make sure we get all the questions in. So Shifting gears a little bit, obviously messaging for a company is really important. So, how do I know my messaging is working? Or I guess more importantly, how do I know that my messaging might have a problem and it might be falling short? How do I figure that out? Cindy, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I can take this. And I think somebody submitted a question earlier that was specifically kind of about home pages and messaging and that kind of thing. And when you think about kind of the attention span nowadays is 0, we really want to make sure that like that message is hitting home in a few short amount of words, because your homepage is the face of the company. And it really is just to kind of draw people through. I do think a lot of times, right, we're in the technology world and we tend to talk about like what we do and not the value it's bringing to the end customer or prospect. So we do see like, a lot of clients that we work with, we work on like making that shift so that the message is actually speaking to the main point or getting at kind of what is the problem in that customer's words? And then you have plenty of room to kind of talk about how you solve that problem. So I think that's one thing. Secondly, I'm going to go back to competitors again, because I know like it takes a lot of time to keep your finger on the pulse of what everyone else is doing, but kind of doing that comparison and stepping back and thinking about, are they doing a better job than I am at like presenting themselves and like, what can I from that? And then the third point I make is that when we think about messaging, it's not only that company messaging of like, as a whole, what are we bringing to the party? But then underneath that, like, what do the services do? And, or if you have products or platforms, like what purpose are they serving? And how do they relate to each other, right? So you never want to think in terms of like buckets, because ideally people are consuming like more than one area of what you're offering. So, and then I think finally, a lot of times we see people hiring outside firms to work messaging. The value there is really when you think about like a disinterested third party of kind of having that ability to step all the way back and really analyze what it is the customer is talking about. And grabbing onto like what's so great about you can kind of like work to your favor if you have somebody who comes to you with kind of fresh ideas. And then I think the final thing I wanted to say is, in particular, if you're facing some kind of shift, right? If you're adding services, if you're expanding geographies, if you're going after any type of persona or company or vertical, it's a really good time to kind of revisit your messaging, keeping up with the pace of your business. So that was a long-winded way of talking about messaging, but something that's near and dear to my heart. And getting it is super important because it's crowded out there.
Yeah, well, and I think you touch on an important point. It's not just about accuracy. You really have to differentiate and stand out, and that's hard to do. And a lot of companies take pride in their people and their processes, but that can only get you so far in kind of how you can portray yourself to the outside world, and especially with prospects, where, to Cindy's point, you have very short attention spans where someone decides whether they stay on your site or leave, or kind of across the different communication touch points you have. So I think that like why you component is such a big one, and just doing an okay job isn't enough. So it's really, to Cindy's point, like understanding, what competitors are saying and make sure you're not just saying the same thing, understanding why customers chose you, why they stay with you, like where they see the value, and then bring that out to the outside world and using that to really kind of catch the attention of a product.
And I think making sure, right, that the internal teams are all telling the same story, and across all the marketing, efforts that you're doing, that you're consistently kind of telling that same story. Because it's easy to go take a left turn and, do something that is kind of off message. So I think it's get a Bible in place is what I'm saying.
Which I think that internal piece is often overlooked. It's one like we always really push hard on, because it's great if you have, fantastic messaging, you might update your sales materials. But then if your internal team, anyone in kind of a client facing role, is saying something a bit different, it's confusing to the market and you're missing that opportunity to amplify kind of the messaging that you've just worked very hard carefully to create.
Yeah, great point.
Absolutely. So Cindy mentioned this in her messaging answer, but there was a question that was submitted about a company planning on adding more service lines or more offerings, right? What are some things that maybe that they would want to keep in mind, both from a messaging perspective, which you both just touched on, but just more in a general sense?
So I think a couple of things. I'm sure, Natalie, you have a lot to say here, understanding on the sales side what impact that has. But I think aside from are all the materials in place to launch this thing, and what's that go-to-market plan for that service line or product line, whatever you're adding in, I think that's table stakes, and make sure it's in place before you're actually going to market. And then I would say start thinking about your install base and how are you going to message to them and inform them about the new service or product line or whatever you're doing. They're often the best place to start because it could have been driven maybe by something a client had asked for. So really understand where that need set came from and then capitalizing on that. And then I would say, one thing, and I know I'm on the competitor track, but think about, does that also change who you should be looking at? Because often when we add new service or product lines, suddenly there's a competitor that we never came up against that we need to consider because they're in that space. So I do think, that's important, that you have to really look out for that. And it's something that is easy to kind of go off the radar. And then finally, I would say, make sure the messaging and the service and product line, the new stuff, kind of dovetails to what you're doing, right? So, and how are we explaining it simply enough? Are we showing that interconnection? I'm sure there's a great reason why for launching it, but be equipped to tell that story, both from a marketing perspective, but also through the sales messaging as well. Natalie, I'm sure you have lots to say on this.
Yeah. Well, and I think to some degree ties back to some of what you said, Cindy, on kind of the messaging question, is really making sure you understand how this service fits together and don't just bolt it on. And the number of times that you see kind of a website that has the navigation, it looks like a number of services have really been bolted on over the years, and that not only are they not doing justice to telling your story in the right way, but it's not necessarily how you want your customers to consume your services. So you're not creating that right hierarchy between the services, or maybe not being clear if some service areas are, skewed towards slightly different audiences, different levels of maturity of the same audience. So taking all of that into account. And then I would say there's an important element of revisiting your kind of overall go-to-market with. And it doesn't mean that, everything necessarily needs to change in your sales and marketing, but I think for more often than not, it's worth taking that time to look at what are you doing from a sales standpoint. Are those, how does this change kind of your sales processes, your need for sales materials? Similarly, on the marketing side, kind of revisiting, what are the marketing programs you have, making a strategic decision, like how much airtime, so to speak, does this offering get? Is it something that's so important that it now becomes your primary or a core way forward? Or is it something you're in pilot experimentation mode, see it as an emerging opportunity? So being very smart about that and being aligned across sales, marketing, and whoever's leading kind of the service product delivery around that as well.
Yeah, great.
Awesome. Well, a couple things you've mentioned, kind of in your answers so far about the internal team and, players in the companies. So there was a question submitted about how do I know about having the mix of marketing? If I'm making a hire, do I need to have someone at a CMO level, or am I just looking to have people, run and implement programs for me? So can you guys speak to that? Natalie, I'll throw that to you to start.
Yeah, sure. I would say, there's truly no one size fits all. And I'm probably going to say that on a number of different questions because it's the truth. But I think, often when we're helping clients, it's as part of our strategic engagements, helping them determine what is the right mix of, in-house and outsource, what is the right time to bring in different roles. I think one of the areas, there's kind of two traps that we see companies often falling into. And I think some of that is just not recognizing how much has changed in marketing. But I think one area is hiring a junior or mid-level marketer that's as a generalist and thinking the organization can kind of the box on their marketing support. And then I think on the flip side is bringing in kind of a senior level marketer, but then not having the execution capacity that's needed, where in reality, you only needed that senior level capacity in full for a short amount of time as you're setting the strategy, defining the messaging, looking at the market, and not to say that those efforts shouldn't be ongoing to some degree when you're launching a new service, for example, but really thinking about what you need now and what's going to look different, 3, 6, 12 months down the line. And I think, the other piece that's important to keep in mind is marketing has become so much more specialized over the years. So even kind of earlier in my career, I think the model worked much better when you could have a small company with one internal marketer that was good enough at all the different areas of marketing. But today it really is so specialized. You need a paid search expert. And even within paid search, there's kind of a lot of nuances to the different paid search platforms. There's marketing automation, there's graphic design and videography, and really because of that specialization, because the spaces are so competitive, really needing to do justice to each of those areas that you're not missing any kind of opportunities and really squeezing kind of the most value you can out of each area that you're executing from a marketing standpoint. So I would say, that right mix, there's an element of as you're in kind of build and strategy and planning mode looks different once you have kind of the plan in place, have proven out some of your marketing programs that they work, then I think you're in a more stable state. And then you can, okay, what here is a full-time role, what here is a part-time role, where can we work with agencies and consultants? And, we work with clients with lots of different models, from fully outsourced to lots of different hybrid models, just to kind of underscore the point that there really is no size fits all.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely echo that things have changed, right? I've been in marketing forever. And there are so many things that I need that specialist. I got to go to them because I don't understand to the depth that a lot of people do, right? So whether that's MarTech or PPC or whatever it is, I can stand all the way down and set strategy, but like if you asked me to hop on Google Analytics, forget it. I can't do it. So just, I have my downsides too. And the only other thing I would add, Allie, is that I would say, like, especially for internal people, is really breaking down, like, what's the level of effort in any one program or area, and map it to the resources that you do have. So you can start to see where the gaps are, then ascertain, like, is that a full-time position or is it not? Because a lot of times, even when you have a great generalist, they'd be spending all their time on content and not enough on, PPC or something like that. So, and that might not be a full-time job for somebody. So I think it's really a balancing act, but understanding like the resources that you do have, are they being utilized in the right way for their skill sets, and you're getting your biggest bang for your buck all the way around. So I think that's important to look at, kind of ground up analysis of the resources you do have.
Yeah, definitely. I think the other thing I would add, just kind of thinking back, the question had kind of need a CMO level person, I think, is being clear on level of strategic support. And I think the terminology can get used in different ways between a CMO, a VP of marketing, a director of marketing. But in kind of the marketing world, I'd say there's more kind of consistent uses across what that means. And a CMO is not necessarily the best person to develop your marketing programs plan, just like a director of marketing, not always kind of the best person to help really look at where the bigger opportunities are in the market. I know there's obviously exceptions to that, but I think self-educating a bit on that, even in starting, looking at kind of what to look for.
Yeah, agreed.
That's a clarification. But so before we go to the next question, I'm just going to pause to anybody out there who has a question, try and make sure you get it in. So we try and answer it live for you, or at least follow up with you. So we'd encourage you to do that. But so this next question, I've heard a lot in my life, and I think it's like a bugaboo for other people. So get ready. What should my marketing budget be? Right. That's the be all end all question for a lot of companies out there. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can take that. I would say lots of different ways you could kind of answer that or tackle the question. I guess I'll start by talking about the categories of marketing spend. And the way we break them down is really thinking of the people costs. So whether that's in-house roles, agencies, freelancers, just anything that requires a person. Technology, which is inclusive of, marketing automation, any other kind of point solution marketing tools, and then out-of-pocket expenses. So that's paid advertising, event sponsorship, sponsoring industry associations, anything like that. And looking at, for your marketing plan, what is the right mix between the three? And the reality is some marketing plans are much heavier on the people side. You might need a lot of content, a lot of, attendance at events that, at least until it takes over the world, you do need people to at least spearhead. And then on the flip side, some companies might do well with a very kind of a more targeted marketing plan. It might be very heavy on the paid advertising. And once you have that right strategy in place, you can kind of rinse and repeat some of those areas more reliably. And then I think, more, specific budget allocations also should be driven by kind of organizational needs. So what do you want or need to get out of marketing? How big of a focus is lead generation versus kind of a more kind of generalized presence in your market? Understanding kind of your starting point from a marketing budgeting standpoint. So there are some industry metrics, maybe Cindy, you can share in a minute. But I find the industry metrics are very helpful to see, how you're spending compared to others in the market. But at the same token, if you haven't spent anything on marketing, you can't necessarily jump from zero to kind of best practice. And so understanding what's feasible for your organization, and then, understanding what you can expect to get out of that. And what you can get out of that as far as, lead generation and things like that, but then also what strategic investments you have to make in order to be able to be successful in things like lead generation.
Yeah, I think it was Gartner that I saw companies between 10 million and 50 million, a survey they did. And it's about 6.5% of revenue was being spent on marketing. And again, Natalie, to your point, it was between kind of the people cost, the MarTech, which was a much smaller part, and then kind of the out of pocket or programming and those kinds of things. And I agree, it's no size one fits all, not one size fits all at all. And but I think, one of the other things that good marketing, we're always trying to drive down the cost of acquisition and, and looking at if I do this event versus, I do some other type of lead gen, like what's my payback on that? And is that really the best way to spend my money? So I do think like there are ways that yes, you're with a fixed amount of budget, but like, how do you get the high performance out of that budget as well? And I mean, it's great on the lead gen side that there are like forecasts of like, if I spend this much money, like what can I kind of expect? And then working that backwards from the funnel requirements and all of that can kind of guide on like, where am I going to have to put this money in order to get the biggest return? So yeah, I hope that answered the question. And there is an answer to that question of exactly what it should be.
Yeah. Well, I think too, it's a bit kind of unfortunately ironic, but it gets easier to answer that question with time. The first time you're defining your marketing budget is the hardest time to do it because you probably don't have all of your sales and marketing metrics in the place that they need to be to have a good funnel, to be able to put more of the science from the kind of art and science of marketing to it. But to Cindy's point, if you have good data, if you are tracking all of your funnel metrics and you have clear like growth goals, your business numbers, you can really look at for the kind of growth we're looking for, how many leads do we need? What are the right programs for us? How much budget does that require? And really be more confident in what is the right marketing budget for our kind of specific needs at this time.
Yeah.
Great. So we did just have a question come in about metrics and reporting, right? So what should be measured? And where should people be focusing their efforts and their energy in terms of those metrics and what's important to them or what should be important to them?
Yeah, I can take that. I would say again, kind of comes back to the goals, but let's just assume kind of lead generation is kind of a goal, at least a key goal. I would say the most holistic way to be thinking about metrics is from the first interaction that you have with I won't even call them a prospect yet, but kind of a contact. So we call that pre-funnel. So that might be things like, quality website traffic, looking at kind of engagement on your social media accounts, things of that nature, where you don't necessarily know who that person is, but are at least showing kind of forward momentum. And there's other ways to look at kind of the quality of those interactions. Then you're starting to move into the things that are a bit more trackable. So like top of funnel marketing lead generation. And then you want to look at leads. You want to define and track marketing qualified leads, MQLs, SQLs, sales qualified leads. And then you're kind of moving into the sales funnel. So from, however your sales process is run, but, sales qualified leads to opportunities to closed one and kind of any other steps that you have in between. But having kind of full visibility into all those kind of metrics is a really powerful asset for knowing what's working so that you can invest more. And I would say kind of knowing what's working is whether it's kind of the right tactics, is your messaging right, are the offers enticing to the target audience, or there kind of segments of your target market that are performing better than others. So a lot of different things at play there. And I guess all of that isn't even really talking about the metrics that are program specific. So SEO and email marketing and Google ads and LinkedIn ads, like each of those has their own set of metrics, and whether you're looking at industry benchmarks or starting to benchmark against yourself, and to Cindy's point, continue to optimize that and not ever really be satisfied with the status quo. Can you drive more? Can you spend less for the same result?
I do think one of the interesting things that you also should look at is kind of where are people getting stuck, like our site in the buyer journey, and where are they dropping off, and what's the engagement rate, and like, are they doing the things that you want them to do on that site, right? There's so much insight that you can get out of that, and pretty easy fixes to see where the problems are and do something about it. Because half the battle is getting somebody like to your site and somehow engaged, and it can often go wrong there, right? They can be like not finding what they need, thinking they need to fill out this form or that form, or whatever it is. So I do think, like you said, within each of those programs, there's so much data that can actually inform low-hanging fruit of improvements that we can make. So hopefully that answered the question that came in.
I think it did. So just switch gears a little bit, because I know that there's in the industry there's a lot of partnerships, right? So I'm curious your thoughts, and one of the questions I sent ahead of time is how to leverage, get more leverage out of a partner relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I can take this, and I've been on both sides of the table, and like vendor community and running MDF programs, and also like helping clients, leverage those programs. And I think a lot of times, sometimes I hate to say this, the money sits on the table and we're not doing enough with it, which, you don't want to do that. I think secondly is really understanding, like, if there's prioritization among the partners that you have, like who are the most engaged, who are the most flexible, who wants to do something different than kind of out of the box. And I think people would be surprised at how engaged like that vendor could be. I come with a good idea. I think secondly, make sure that whatever programming you put in place, it's not so skewed to the vendor that your message, which is actually what we want, right? That your message doesn't come through clearly, or, that it's not positioned like as a partnership. So I think that's just like a trap that often happens, is people take what's out of the box from the vendor, and it's not really serving the purposes that we want it to for the IT services firm. And then I think I'll just give a good example. One of our clients had MDF funds, and we ended up doing a SAN survey and a report with those MDF funds. Both parties benefited, both the vendor and the services firm. And of course, like, it got a lot of traction because it was original research, and it was all paid through the MDF funds. But we helped design like what the survey and what should be in the report, and kind of guided it so that what came out of it was really worthwhile for this firm. So it was just a great example. And secondly, and this was not my idea, I just saw someone had done this, that they had an event, and it was through MDF funds, but it was at the Converse headquarters. And if you're in Boston, you know, and if you've ever been there, it's just amazing. So it was like this out of the box venue, just a really creative way of kind of applying those funds in a way that will attract prospects. So I would say use the money, and don't be afraid to come up with new ideas of like the programming that can happen out of that fund. Anything else now?
Yeah, I'll touch on a couple things. I would say one is taking that time up front to really understand the ins and outs of what each of your kind of vendors provides. Because, and I know it can be a bit arduous and like a little bit of the grunt work, but you know, to Cindy's point, like you need to understand what's on the table or on the menu in order to know kind of what you can ask for off menu, but it also allows you to then build it into your marketing plan. I think far too often, the M funds becomes an afterthought. So you have your marketing plan, you have all your quarterly activity mapped out, and then it's, oh, well, let's try to do this with our MDF rather than kind of having it kind of a strategic element of the activity. Another area I would say is really making sure that that marketing is getting kind of sufficient attention on this element. I think oftentimes we see that the partner support is heavier on the sales side, and there might be kind of a sales lead, but the marketing, either the person in charge doesn't have the time, hasn't had that background in marketing because it is more of a kind of nichier skill set within marketing. So making sure bringing in that right support. And then I had another comment on partnerships that is not specific to kind of maximizing the funds, but really think about also building the relationships with those vendor partner, like those vendor sales contacts, because that's another area where I think there's often missed opportunity. And again, those relations tend to be kind of strong and active on the sales side, but how can you utilize marketing to get in front of kind of the channel sales reps? And be similar to how you think about lead generation, right? Can you a newsletter out to them? Can you do a WinWire? How do you keep in touch with them on LinkedIn, through email? Can you do a lunch and learn for them? And really building those relationships, because that's also where you drive new opportunity out of.
Yeah, I mean, and most of the vendors, I mean, I think probably all of them have a specific channel marketing person, right? So I do think forming the relationship at the sales and the marketing side is super important.
But we did just have one question come in during the comments. So switching gears, I think from the tactical side and the strategic thinking side, the question is how or has anybody, and I guess how would you measure the value of what the question asks, goodwill spending, as an example of being a sponsor at a customer event or something to that nature. So just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I can say something about that. And I'm all about that. I think we're services firms, right? So thinking about what does that mean, and kind of what can we do for the community? How can we be more involved, right? So and that includes philanthropic, and it's great fodder for PR as well, and networking and all of those things. So I'm personally all about that. And I think it reinforces the position of the company, right? It gives that extra kind of authentic, empathetic, you know, if in fact it's, you know, near and dear to their heart. I'm all about doing that kind of activity.
I would say just a bit, and this is, you know, sponsoring events, I think in general is also being clear about what you're looking to get out of it, and not generally expecting kind of an immediate return, but more of that kind of halo effect of impact. And then being clear about kind of when and how are you ready for it. So both kind of your appetite, your budget, and again, making sure you're clear on kind of what success looks like, and why you're doing it. And then I would say for events like that in general is finding the right mix between like that, the goodwill spending, being in the community, raising your visibility, and then utilizing content and putting your thought leadership out there, because ultimately like you are a services firm. It's your expertise, your people, your thinking that people are coming to you for. And I think sometimes events skew more towards kind of the fun and the kind of wine and dine, which there's nothing wrong with that. Believe me, I love those. But also, right, bringing the value that ultimately is the reason a client or prospect would engage you.
Great.
That makes sense. So we did have one other final question to this point, unless anybody else can enter some into the comments. But again, another question that I think is burning for a lot of people is we need more leads. How do we go about doing that? Right? What are some strategies and tactics to drive lead generation?
I can take that. At least start with that. I would say whenever I hear that question, I think the first thing I always want to dig into is kind of what are the expectations on what kind of leads and in what time frame, and what is kind of the support between sales and marketing for that. Because when we have companies come to us saying they need more leads, we want to make sure there's also the right things in place from a company structure standpoint, that if market is generating leads, we have the right support on the sales side to have that submit. Because I wish that any marketing lead generated was immediately ready for a sales conversation. I know Gary is that as well. But the reality is, you do get some of those, like the people that fill out a form on your website and ask to be contacted, or the low funnel campaigns that someone's right away ready for a sales call. But the reality is, for more often than not, it takes persistence and diligence on the sales side to do the follow-up and kind of nurture that relationship. Marketing can certainly help to support that nurture as well. But really thinking holistically at kind of what, your ability to work the leads that are being generated. And then when you are sure you have kind of those right elements in place, or you work to get those elements in place, you can also in parallel look, what are the quick wins, what are the low-hanging fruit to generate leads. And there are some things you can put in place pretty quickly. We like almost always when we're working with a new client, as we're making sure we have the right strategic direction and foundations in place, we have a second kind of track of execution where we are starting to drive some kind of quick lead generation. But again, with that eye towards making sure we're not generating leads that are then kind of falling by the wayside, but that we're maximizing kind of everything that we're doing.
I would just add two other things is thinking about referrals. I mean, obviously, that's a great referral is the best way to get business, right? It doesn't always have to be like some kind of formal program, but I think a lot of times, right, and I'm in delivery, you're reticent to ask, right? So making sure that your customer base or your client base like understands a perfect fit for your company is XYZ, because word of mouth is obviously one of the best ways. And the second thing I'll say is that I think so, like for a lot of companies, is underutilized. When you think about the power of people engaging on social, and it doesn't have to be only the sales and marketing people. It can be the executives. It can be the secretaries. You never know like who's in your network, right? So I do think that like that's under tapped by a lot of companies, of the power of like what can happen there and the amplification of messages to reach more people. So I think, that's worth it for doing lead generation.
Yeah. The other thing you made me think of, Cindy, is you're talking about some of the tactics. I think, referrals are great, word of mouth, obviously. A lot of companies we see have maybe tapped out, whether perceived or kind of reality on that. And so that's when they look to marketing in a different way than they have previously. I think just recognizing that to build up some of those channels organically, like to build up your presence on kind of Google through search engine optimization and building up your social presence. There are some quicker wins, but ultimately like those things do take longer. And I would say, don't be afraid of paid channels, because they can work really well. And I'm not always sure why, but I think there's sometimes a reticence to invest in those. And I think there are ways to be very targeted, very specific towards who you want to go after and how you reach them. and then how you kind of foster that relationship. That can be some of the smart ways to get started.
Yeah, agreed.
Great. Well, I think that wraps up all the questions that we've had this far. So I'll ask both of you if you have any final kind of parting thoughts before we wrap up. Anything you'd like to add?
No, these were great questions. And certainly, like, I'm hoping we do this again, because I think it's always worthwhile to kind of have these like dialogues.
Yeah, agreed. I think great questions. They're the types of questions we get often. We're working with clients or in kind of discussions there in the world. So if anyone has any other questions they think of offline, we're happy to answer those as well.
It's all about the network.
Absolutely. And I would remind everybody, we will be sending this webinar out, the recording of it, so you can, again, if you missed anything, you can kind of go back and look it back over, and would remind the opportunity for the marketing health check. I think it'd be worthwhile just to get a kind of a lay of the land of how things are working for your company and where you guys might have some opportunities. So with that, we will say thank you all for joining. Hope you have a great rest of the day and a great weekend, and we hope to talk to you soon.
Great. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.